The invitation said, "Dress nice." That should have been my first warning. My 30th birthday fell on a Saturday, and for once I let myself believe something good was waiting for me. My mother had been oddly cheerful all week. My sister kept texting heart emojis. Even my dad, who normally forgot dates unless they involved taxes or sports, called to say, "Don't make plans. We've got you covered." I told myself maybe this year would be different. When I pulled up to my parents' house, the driveway was already full. Cars lined the curb in both directions. I recognized my aunt's SUV, my cousin's sedan, even my old high school friend Marissa's little blue hatchback. My heart actually skipped. "Wow," I whispered to myself. "They really did something." The front door swung open before I could knock. "Surprise!" The word exploded around me as I stepped inside. 40 faces turned toward me at once. Balloons floated against the ceiling. A long table stretched across the living room, covered in food. A banner hung crookedly above the fireplace. "Happy 30th!" I laughed, stunned. "You guys!" My sister rushed forward first, hugging me a little too tightly. "You're so surprised!" she squealed. I noticed her phone angled over my shoulder, camera pointed straight at my face. Dad clapped me on the back. "Big milestone," he said. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Mom kissed my cheek, lipstick leaving a faint mark on my skin. "Go sit down, sweetheart. We planned something special." Special. They guided me to a chair positioned in front of the fireplace. It wasn't near the cake. It wasn't near the table. It faced the room. I hesitated. "Why am I sitting here?" "Just trust us," Mom said brightly. The chatter softened, conversations trailed off. Someone dimmed the lights slightly. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it was nerves. Maybe they'd made a slideshow. Maybe it was embarrassing baby photos. I could survive that. Dad stepped forward. He didn't hold a drink. He held a piece of paper. He cleared his throat. "We're here because we love you." Polite nods circled the room. "And because," he continued, voice steady, "we're concerned." A flicker of confusion passed through me. "Concerned?" I repeated lightly, hoping this was a joke. Mom stepped beside him, clutching a notebook. My sister moved to the side of the room, phone lifted higher. Dad's jaw tightened. "You've become selfish, ungrateful. You've been tearing this family apart." The air shifted. At first I thought I misheard him. A strange ringing filled my ears. I scanned the room, expecting someone to laugh. No one did. Mom opened her notebook. "I've made a list," she said, voice trembling as if she were the injured one. "Everything that's been hurting us for years." My hands went cold. She began reading. "You've always had trouble thinking about others. Even as a child, you refused to share. At your graduation, you barely thanked us. When you moved out, you abandoned your responsibilities. You never contribute enough to family gatherings. You refuse to support your sister when she needs you." My sister zoomed in on my face. Heat crept up my neck, but I stayed still. Around me, guests shifted in their seats. Some avoided eye contact. Others leaned forward, curious. A few nodded sympathetically, though I couldn't tell for whom. Mom continued. "You think you're better than us because of your job. You correct us. You distance yourself. You don't call enough. You don't visit enough. You don't appreciate what we've sacrificed." Each sentence landed like a small, deliberate stone. Dad added, "This is an intervention. We're trying to help you see how your behavior affects everyone." 40 pairs of eyes, 40 silent judges. My pulse pounded, but my face felt oddly calm, almost detached, as if I were watching someone else sit in that chair. My sister circled slightly to get a better angle. "This is going to help so many people," she murmured, half to her phone. "Help." Mom lowered her notebook. "We just want you to admit you've been wrong." Silence settled thick and heavy. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at each of them. my parents, my sister, relatives, friends. Then I asked softly, "Are you finished?" The silence after I asked, "Are you finished?" felt heavier than everything they had just said. My father blinked, thrown off script. My mother clutched her notebook tighter, as if there were more pages she could weaponize if needed. My sister shifted her weight, adjusting her phone for a better angle, clearly expecting tears. Maybe anger, maybe a dramatic exit. I gave them none of it. Dad cleared his throat. "If you have something to say, now's the time." "Oh, I do," I replied calmly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. It wasn't a dramatic movement. It wasn't rushed. I simply stood, walked to the TV console, and picked up the remote. My sister's smile flickered. "What are you doing?" "Participating," I said. I connected my phone to the television. The screen lit up with the familiar reflection of the room, 40 people staring back at themselves. "You wanted accountability," I said gently. "So let's talk about it." I pressed play. The first audio clip filled the room. My father's voice, clear, unmistakable. "I'll just put the loan in her name. She won't check. She trusts us." A sharp intake of breath rippled across the room. Dad's face drained of color. That was taken out of context. I didn't respond. I just let the clip finish. The next recording began. My mother's voice, hushed but firm. "If we tell everyone she's struggling mentally, they'll understand why she doesn't come around. It makes us look patient." Murmurs broke out. My aunt covered her mouth. Mom shook her head rapidly. "That's not what I meant." I tapped the screen again. A series of screenshots appeared. A family group chat I wasn't supposed to know about. My sister's messages glowed on the screen. "She acts like she's better than us because of her little job. Wait until her birthday. Mom has an idea. It'll humble her." Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." My sister lowered her phone slowly, forgetting to record. I kept going. A voice memo played. My sister again. "If we stream part of it, it'll go viral. People love interventions." A few guests instinctively glanced at her, then at their own phones, suddenly aware they might be part of something ugly. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't accusing. I was simply pressing play. Next came a conversation between my father and his business partner. "She covers the rent sometimes. Guilt works. Just remind her of everything we did for her growing up." His business partner, who was standing near the kitchen island, stared at him in disbelief. "You said she insisted on helping," the partner said quietly. Dad didn't answer. Then came another screenshot. A message my mother had sent to my cousin. "She thinks she's independent, but she'd fall apart without us." My cousin slowly shook her head. The atmosphere shifted from spectacle to exposure. The confidence my parents had started with was gone. Their certainty unraveled with every second of playback. Finally, I paused the screen. "I didn't record these to embarrass you," I said. "I recorded them because every time I tried to explain how I felt, I was told I was dramatic, or ungrateful, or misremembering." No one interrupted. "So I stopped arguing," I continued, "and I started documenting." My sister found her voice. "You recorded us? That's insane." "No," I said quietly. "Planning a public humiliation for your daughter's birthday is insane." A couple near the back, my cousin and her fiancé, began whispering urgently. He looked at the screen again, at a message where my mother had implied their engagement party budget came from borrowing money from me. His expression hardened. Across the room, my father's business partner stepped away from him, phone already in hand. I didn't need to add commentary. The truth was doing its own work. "I didn't tear this family apart," I said finally. "I just stopped protecting its lies." The room that had once felt like a stage now felt like a courtroom. And for the first time that night, I wasn't the one on trial. The days after the birthday intervention were quieter than I expected. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that comes before everything cracks. I woke up the next morning to dozens of missed calls and messages. Not from me. They were from people who had been at the party. Some were shocked, some angry, some confused. My phone buzzed constantly. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years, coworkers, even distant cousins. Most of the messages were short, fragmented. I can't believe this. Is this real? I had no idea. The first few hours were surreal. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. They were seeing the family they thought they knew, peeling back layer by layer. The clips I had shown weren't edited, weren't sensationalized. They were simply the truth. And truth, in its quiet and unflinching way, has a way of shattering facades. By the third day, the fallout started in earnest. My sister's TikTok post, meant to highlight the funny moment of the intervention, went viral in the most unexpected way. Viewers didn't side with her, they sided with me. Comments pointed out how manipulative and calculated the intervention seemed, how her laughter in the background was cruel, how my calm composure had been both brave and devastating. She tried to post again, trying to explain herself, but each post only dug the hole deeper. My mother, who had always relied on social perception and social circles, began to feel the ripple. Invitations from her friends stopped arriving. Calls from her church group were replaced with long, awkward silences. People she had subtly influenced with little half-truths now questioned every story she had told. She reached out to me once with a flurry of apologies in a single text, but I didn't respond. Not yet. Dad was worse. Business partners called, not to scold me, but to ask for clarification. One partner, someone who had quietly supported me in previous years, confronted him about loans he had claimed I had agreed to. He stumbled over his words, his confident veneer crumbling. He tried to call me several times. I didn't answer. He sent flowers to my apartment. An empty gesture, more like a token of desperation. Relationships that had seemed stable began to unravel. Couples argued about what they had seen. Friends whispered about what had been said off camera. And the web of half-truths and lies started to expose cracks that had existed for years. 6 people I had known and trusted left my apartment complex in less than a week, moving out under the pretense of family conflicts that had been fabricated by people I had once called my closest kin. All the while, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I grieved, not for revenge, but for what I had lost before the intervention even happened. Love, trust, connection. I had hoped for understanding, and instead I had uncovered betrayal layered upon betrayal. Some nights I stared at my ceiling, phone off, replaying the memory of my parents' faces, the room full of people who had all been complicit. The humiliation they had planned for me had turned inward. Their pride and their secrets had become their own undoing. And still, I felt a strange emptiness where joy might have been. I began to realize something important. Revenge, when it's quiet and precise, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like confirmation. Confirmation that the people you loved the most were not capable of the honesty, care, or respect you deserved. That they would rather construct a narrative to humiliate than to understand. And in that quiet grief, I made a decision. I wouldn't lash out. I wouldn't expose more than I already had. I would let their own actions, their own words, and their own lies dismantle the foundations of the relationships they had built on deception. I called my best friend one evening. I didn't want to win, I said, voice low, almost a whisper. I wanted them to love me. And in that admission, I began to understand the true cost of the intervention. Not the embarrassment, not the exposure, but the painful clarity that love, if it isn't earned with honesty, isn't really love at all. So I blocked their numbers. I stopped responding. I stopped visiting. I stopped expecting. And for the first time, I started planning something different. Something for me. Something that couldn't be manipulated. Something that couldn't be taken away. Months passed, and the quiet I had created around myself became a kind of sanctuary. The fallout from the intervention continued, but it no longer reached me directly. My phone stayed mostly silent, except for messages from people who truly cared, friends who hadn't witnessed the spectacle but had been filled in on the truth. They reached out not with judgment, but with support, with empathy, with reminders that I wasn't alone. I found myself moving into a new apartment. Smaller, yes, but brighter and calmer. I painted the walls myself, chose furniture that made me smile, hung photographs of people who had loved me without conditions. Each decision felt like reclaiming a piece of life that had been held hostage by lies and expectations. I started therapy, something I had resisted for years, and slowly began to untangle the threads of guilt and self-blame that had been woven into me by my family's manipulations. The world outside my apartment shifted too. My sister reached out a few times, her messages longer, softer, filled with excuses and apologies. My mother's texts were more desperate, filled with confessions of regret and half-hearted pleas for forgiveness. My father called once or twice, but he didn't demand. He just left his voice, quiet, unsure. I read their words carefully, but I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I focused on myself. I cultivated friendships that were honest and reciprocal, friendships that didn't have strings attached or hidden judgments. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see, small trips at first, then longer journeys. Each mile, each new experience, felt like a stitch in a wound that had never fully healed. Time passed, and I realized something vital. The sweetest revenge was not in retaliation or exposing them further. The sweetest revenge was growing beyond the reach of the people who had tried to control me, building a life so full and grounded that their manipulations no longer mattered. On my 31st birthday, I hosted a small dinner. Only 5 people were there, friends who had been with me through every quiet, painful moment since that infamous intervention. No balloons, no speeches, no cameras, just laughter and warmth, and the kind of acceptance I had longed for all my life. Someone raised a toast. "To honesty," she said, "and to the people who survived being gaslighted by the ones they loved." I smiled, a real smile, one that didn't hide a twinge of resentment or fear. I realized that in surviving their betrayal, I had discovered my own strength. My life had been stripped of its false structures, and in that emptiness, I had built something real. My family continued to try to reach me, but I no longer felt any need to respond. I didn't block them out of anger. I blocked them out to protect the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. When my sister sent long, tearful apologies, I replied only once, "I forgive you, but I won't return." And that was enough. The world I had created for myself wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I spent my days working on projects I loved, nurturing friendships that mattered, and allowing myself the quiet joy of self-respect. I no longer needed their approval or their love to define my worth. At night, I would sometimes reflect on the intervention. I remembered the faces, the accusations, the whispers, the humiliation. But I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I felt clarity. I had been handed a painful lesson, and I had survived it, unbroken. The best revenge, I realized, had never been public spectacle or emotional retribution. It had been simply refusing to be destroyed. By stepping away, by growing, by choosing honesty and self-respect over approval, I had claimed a kind of victory that could never be taken from me. And in that victory, I finally felt at peace. I had loved, I had grieved, and I had grown. And that was more than anyone in that room had ever expected, and perhaps more than they would ever understand. I raised a glass quietly to myself, not to gloat, not to punish, but to honor the life I had reclaimed. The life they tried to shatter had only become stronger in the cracks. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled freely, knowing I was finally free.